For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, pursuant to House Resolution 491, I call up the resolution H-Res 489 and ask for its immediate consideration in the House.
Clerk will report the title of the resolution.
House Resolution 489, resolution condemning President Trump's racist comments directed at members of Congress.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from, pursuant to House Resolution 491. The resolution is considered read. The resolution shall be debatable for 1 hour, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on the Judiciary. The gentleman from New York, Mr. Nadler, and the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Collins, each will control 30 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. Nadler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and insert extraneous material on H-Res 489.
Without objection.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I yield myself 3 minutes.
The gentleman is recognized for 3 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, the comments described in this resolution were not just offensive to our colleagues. They were inconsistent with the principles and values upon which this nation was founded. In urging 4 female members of Congress of color to, quote, go back where they came from, these comments were not only factually incorrect, but they were also deeply hurtful and divisive. These were shocking comments, even from an administration that rips children from the arms of their parents and warehouses asylum seekers in facilities under inhumane conditions. We cannot let this moment pass without a forceful condemnation. Need I remind the Speaker that this is the same president who defended the, quote, very fine people at the neo-Nazi march on Charlottesville, who denounced the, quote, S-hole countries in Africa and the Caribbean, who claimed that Haitian immigrants, quote, all have AIDS, and who declared that a Mexican-American judge who was born in the United States had a, quote, inherent conflict of interest against him. At every turn, Democrats have denounced offensive comments that emanate from the White House, but the silence coming from the other side of the aisle has been deafening. I hope that will finally change today. This Congress must speak loudly and with one voice to condemn the president's words, and more importantly, to condemn the sentiments behind them. The United States should be a beacon of hope and a refuge to those who need its protection, and it should welcome with open arms those who embody our values and ideals. From our earliest days as a nation, we have welcomed people fleeing persecution and violence, and those who seek economic opportunity and freedom in a land whose diversity is one of its greatest strengths. But the president has instead pursued a relentless campaign to build both a literal and a figurative wall around this nation. We must not turn our backs on our historic commitment to immigration and to refuge, and we must not fall prey to racial stereotypes and native fear-mongering that think that some immigrants who came here years ago are okay, but those who come here today, because they're from so-called S-hole countries, are not okay. It was Martin Luther King who told us that, quote, I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character, close quote. The offensive words by the president undermine that dream. They contradict that dream. I hope that all of my colleagues will join me in denouncing racism and in supporting this resolution. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 30 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this is the 3rd time that I've stood in this year on this floor about this subject. And I've been clear at every juncture. Racism, bigotry, and anti-Semitism will find no refuge in the people's house. We expect each other to speak fairly, truthfully, respectfully of all of our fellow members of Congress and of the president. Not because we agree with each other all the time, but because we have great respect for the Americans who elected us and to represent them from one end of Pennsylvania Avenue to the other. I come here today, Mr. Speaker, with much grief and many questions. The first may be procedural, but it is not trivial. The Democrats wrote a resolution last night. It is on the floor today. I just have a question. What happened to the 72-hour rule, ensuring members have an opportunity to review legislation, seek feedback from constituents before voting on it? What happened to regular order? This never came through committee. Why does the House have rules if the Democratic majority only follows them when politically convenient? And also, that was brought up in the rules debate, that there was even no consultation with even others who would want to be a part of this. The president has every right to be frustrated with Congress for the work that we have failed to do on multiple fronts, including the border. I also understand that his recent tweets make it hard for us to move forward. Attacks are like quicksand. They trap and they defeat us before we know it. They're distracting us from legislating, and that was true when the lawmaker implied last week that a member of the House leadership was singled out newly elected women of color, and when other representatives were accused of enabling a racist system. It is true as we see little to no concern from my colleagues across the aisle when a foreign flag is raised over an American facility or a terrorist firebombed another facility. It is true when the President of the United States, out of frustration, tweeted this weekend, and it is true of many comments coming from lawmakers today. In fact, it is interesting for my chairman to say that they have called out the president every time, but also many times, and this is just a small listing of every week, that they've not called out their own members for things that I cannot read on this floor. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, we are too quick, this Congress, to allow political ends to justify procedural means. But that is not democracy rooted in our unalienable rights. Rights, the second clause in this resolution affirms. The resolution is simply a lesson in political expediency. Integrity is a prerequisite to our covenant to govern by the consent of the people, which this resolution also affirms. We knew when we voted for the House rules of this January, we could not, in this chamber, use certain language about other democratically elected leaders. We agreed to let ideas compete for our votes and use rhetoric as a tool to build bridges instead of as a kindling to burn those bridges down. Yet not a week goes by, as we've already pointed out, without members of this body issuing statements or tweets that I could not and will not read from this floor without violating our rules. And it is amazing but not surprising some of my colleagues are using this platform to call for impeachment, since many have been making that call since November of 2016. No justification then, and definitely not now. You see, Mr. Speaker, pleas for decorum aren't merely a refuge for lawmakers who find themselves in the minority. Decorum is a symptom of a healthy and confident democracy. When we can debate ideas on this floor, decorum ensures democracy's every voice can be heard. I would like to lend my voices to the chorus of lawmakers supporting the first 15 clauses of this resolution, but for the misguided title and the fourth page of this resolution, we could have had a suspension vote. To its credit, the resolution states the House of Representatives is committed to keeping America open to those lawfully seeking refuge and asylum. I agree. Everyone who votes for this resolution will now be on record as opposing illegal immigration, and I hope we can all work together to address the border crisis based on that common foundation. But again, you don't need a vote on this resolution to do that. You simply have to look at the border and acknowledge the crisis. But we will still have a problem with this resolution. We cannot, and by our own House rules, support a resolution that labels the president in this way, and I will not. The rules that have governed this body since the first United States Congress do not allow us to devolve in that way. However, it doesn't mean that we can't condemn racial or ethnic prejudice. It doesn't mean that we can't decisively reject anti-Semitism, as we have on this floor. But in my view, we've not done it so far in this Congress to that extent. We have failed and have both times on the clarion call of that process failed. I know some colleagues on both sides of the aisle would join each other in that conviction. Our own standards of decorum, however, in fact, empower us to welcome to America every person who respects our laws and wants our help and defend our freedom. These standards also give us a platform to admit when we and those around us make mistakes. When we consider the power of this chamber to legislate for the common good, I wonder why my colleagues have become so eager to attack the president, they are willing to sacrifice the rules, precedent, and the integrity of the people's house for an unprecedented vote that undercuts its very democratic processes. I wonder if the comments in view today are what some of my colleagues say they are. Why this resolution, they had to rephrase the resolution to make this point. The resolution condemns comments in a way that exposes the breathtaking partisanship of today's exercise. The resolution quotes only 3 words from the comment. It rejects the words "go back" and "invaders." Beyond those 3 words, the resolution substitutes its own phrasing and editorializing for the words this resolution has in view. Again, partisan show. That's why the tale of today's resolution is more of a political jab than anything else. It is therefore a signal for us to take a moment to look inward. I wonder if, when we are tempted to accuse our sister, our brother, our fellow American political foe, or even this Madam Speaker of racism. By the way, I do not believe the president is a racist. I do not believe the Speaker of this House is a racist. I do not believe the majority leader is a racist. I do not believe the minority leader is a racist. We can go down this line. I do not believe that. And while we insist on using this floor to litigate the propriety of statements made outside these walls, we assign a lot of wicked intent to a lot of tweets, even though 280 characters offers us at least least context for making our points and endless potential for misunderstanding each other. To be fair, a lot of political speech today seems to be made to deepen our divide by highlighting our differences. And that is a cause for sadness. That is exactly why the rules of decorum in this body designed to guard against. We have a choice this afternoon, Mr. Speaker. We can pursue escalation against our fellow Americans, or we can pursue reconciliation on their behalf. Only one of those options make room for this body to do its job, the legislating of solutions for the challenges of the American people. Many of the members in this chamber are my friends, and I'm thankful for the chance to work alongside each of them every day. But today, we renew our commitment to democratic ideals of this chamber by voting against a flawed resolution, against a political statement, against something that could not even be written in a proper way without adding editorial and paraphrased comments. I would ask each of my friends on both sides of the aisle to evaluate what is before them, evaluate what we have done, and evaluate what we don't take up for political convenience when it's our side saying it. And with that, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from New York.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished Majority Leader of the House.
Majority Leader is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for yielding. I want to thank the gentleman from Georgia, who is my friend. And I want to respectfully say to him, this resolution is not about partisanship. It's about prejudice. And the necessity to confront it. Mr. Speaker, my father was from Denmark. He was born and raised in Copenhagen and came here as an adult in his 20s. I have a large extended family in Denmark. The President of the United States, Mr. Speaker, did not tell me to go back to Denmark. He did not tell the Speaker of this House, a woman proud of her Italian-American heritage, to go back to Italy. He did not tell the Irish-American members of this body to go back to Ireland, or tell those of German ancestry to go back to Germany. No, he told 4 women of color, 3 of whom are natural-born citizens, born and raised in their home country of America, to go back to their countries. This is their country, Mr. Speaker, I would tell the President. And it is the country of our colleagues who came here as a refugee from Somalia. She endured hardships and arrived on our shores like so many others, seeking freedom, safety, and opportunity. She is an American citizen, one who chose to give back to her community and our country through public service. This is her country. I will not speculate on this floor about the motives or intentions of the President. But no one can dispute that the words he said and wrote were racist words and have been called such by Republicans, with a long history of being used to demean, dismiss, and denigrate some American citizens as less than others, as not fully belonging in our country because of the color of their skin or the origin of their families. Mr. Speaker, to oppose this resolution is in effect saying the words were acceptable. They were not acceptable. Such words should never be acceptable from the leader of this country or, frankly, anybody else. They demean our Declaration of Independence. They demean our Constitution. And they demean our Pledge of Allegiance. One nation, indivisible. So I urge this House to come together and support this resolution. No matter whether one supports this president or not, whether one believes he is a racist or not, vote for this resolution that condemns the words he spoke. They hurt. They are not American. They're not us. The sentiment was not one we ought to espouse. And I say to the president, Mr. Speaker, if I were speaking to him, the next time you wish to denigrate and demean those who came here or the children and grandchildren of immigrants, say it to me. Say it to all of us in this house. Say it to every descendant of immigrants. Express the sentiment of the House of Representatives that this is not the conversation that we have in America. We lift our lamp beside the golden door. Let us keep that flame bright. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Before we go any further, let me just remind members to refrain from engaging in personality-based remarks toward the president. The gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Collins, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This time I yield 4 minutes to the gentleman from California, Mr. McClintock.
The gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We have unfortunately entered a period of our history when our political rhetoric has become hyperbolic, just as our political views are becoming increasingly irreconcilable. We would all be well advised not to continue down this road. America, love it or leave it, is not a new sentiment nor a radical sentiment, and it certainly is not a racist sentiment. It should remind us of commonly held and enduring founding principles that ought to be uniting us as a free people. Respect for the rule of law and for the uniquely American principles of individual liberty, constitutionally limited government, and personal responsibility that have produced the happiest, most productive, and most powerful nation in the history of the world. Every nation has a right to protect its culture, traditions, institutions, and principles. This fundamental consensus is what binds us together and unites us as a free people. And it's what makes possible all of the compromises and accommodations required by democratic self-government. We have entered an era when that consensus is breaking down. We have seen a growing hostility to our American founders, our American founding principles, and our proud American heritage. Legal immigration, immigrants who come to our country by obeying our laws, respecting our nation's sovereignty, and bringing with them a sincere desire to embrace our Constitution and the principles of liberty that animate and inform our form of government, is integral to this process. Some of the most patriotic Americans I know are legal immigrants who obeyed our laws, who waited patiently in line, who did everything our country asked of them. Some of the most unpatriotic Americans I know were born here and have enjoyed all the blessings of liberty without ever appreciating or even understanding the principles that produced our nation's greatness and its goodness. Socialism and slavery spring from the same principle. In Lincoln's words, the same spirit that says, "You work and toil and make bread, and I will eat it." He reminded us that a house divided against itself cannot stand. He said, "I do not expect the house to fall, but I do expect that it must cease to be divided. It must become all one thing or all the other." He understood that freedom and slavery were antithetical, and though they might be held together in a temporary accommodation, they could not coexist for long. Today, we face the same conflict between freedom and socialism, and it is time to choose. Now, I wish the president were more temperate in the words he sometimes uses, and I agree that the tone of his recent remarks was unnecessarily provocative. But his central point is irrefutable. There is no requirement for those who hate our country to remain here, when there are so many other countries with different principles and values to choose from, and that have in turn produced very different results. This is as true of those born here as those who have come here from abroad. This president spoke not of race, but of patriotism, American patriotism. And to call that racist fundamentally misunderstands and misrepresents the question before our country today. I yield back.
The gentleman yields. Gentleman from Georgia reserves. The gentleman from New York is now recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from New Jersey, the sponsor of the resolution, Mr. Malinowski.
The gentleman is recognized. The gentleman is recognized for 3.5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, when I saw the president's comments over the weekend, my first thought was my politics may not always be the same as the congresswomen he was attacking, but all of us are Americans, and unlike most of them, I was actually born in a foreign country. I took the oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States when I was 10 years old with my mom, when I was sworn in to be a citizen, 5 years after we came here from Poland. Does the president think I should go back because I'm an immigrant who disagrees with his policies? There are 44 million of us American citizens who are born somewhere else, and we new Americans know what it means to be American because we chose America. We know the alternative. Many of us do come from broken countries. Communist country, in my case, broken by communism, and in many cases broken by leaders who did just what we are condemning today, using race and religion to divide people. The president may be doing it cynically. He wants the drama. He wants the reality show. In my district, we have to deal with the reality that these words are dangerous. Every synagogue in my district either has armed security or is struggling with the question of whether to have it. Every mosque has state police coming to Friday prayers. We know that the words the president uses to drive up his ratings can be like sparks to the gasoline of disturbed minds in our country. That the man who massacred Jews in Pittsburgh was obsessed with migrant caravans and blamed Jews for helping refugees. That the man who murdered Muslims in Christchurch, New Zealand, believed immigrants are invaders who should go back to their countries. These fringe haters have always been with us. Never before have their twisted thoughts been legitimized by the highest leaders in our land. Yesterday, after the president's tweets, the neo-Nazi Daily Stormer website gloated that this is the kind of white nationalism we voted for. Now we have to decide, is this the kind of politics that we want in our country? Mr. Speaker, this resolution is not really about the president. We know who he is. My Republican colleagues know who he is. The question is, the only question left to us is, who are we? Because this is not about him, this is about us. Are we still the country of immigrants and of laws that every great American leader, from Ben Franklin to FDR to John F. Kennedy to George Bush, believed in? Do we still believe what Ronald Reagan said, that Americans lead the world because unique among nations we draw our people, our strength from every country and every corner of the world? That new Americans renew our pride and gratitude in the United States of America, the greatest, freest nation in the world? This is the choice that every member of the House will have to make tonight. Do we agree with President Reagan's hopeful, confident, patriotic vision of America, or with President Trump's message of fear? Mr. Speaker, Republicans and Democrats can afford to disagree about many things in this House, but let us not be divided on decency to our fellow Americans. At this defining moment for our country and for this body, let us come together to support this resolution. Thank you, and I yield back my time.
The gentleman yields. The gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This time I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Gonzalez.
Gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you. I was one of the first Republicans, I believe, to speak out once the comments came public on Sunday. I did it Sunday afternoon, and then I did it again on Monday. But I cannot, in good faith, support this resolution because I can't possibly overlook the partisan nature in which it was brought forward and the number of issues that we have control over in the House that we're choosing to ignore and have continued to ignore since we were sworn in January. We have members of this body who have called detention facilities concentration camps. have supported people who are labeling our Border Patrol agents and our ICE officers as Nazis. The gentleman just mentioned some folks outside of this body of Congress who he believes, have been inspired by certain comments. Well, where is the condemnation of these? When are we going to stand up and condemn those who call Americans who are doing their jobs, by the way, enforcing laws that we enact, Nazis? When are we going to push back on that? When are we going to push back on comments, and I quote, after one of our members was criticized, said, after the comments, I got a text message from a friend who's like, hey, next time, really clarify. Maybe talk like a fourth grader because maybe the racist idiots will understand you better. Am I a racist idiot? Do I read at a fourth grade level? Do the members of this body? Have we gotten so broken as a Congress where a simple disagreement results in us labeling one another racist idiots? Is that who we are? Where's the condemnation? When are we going to speak out about that? And I don't have to remind this body about the last time we were here for a similar process, when one of our members said it's all about the Benjamins, implying that members of both sides of the aisle are being purchased and bought by our Jewish brothers and sisters. When are we going to stand up and speak out against that? Because I've been here for 7 months now, and it's the same thing over and over again. And the people who lose, and we all know this, are the constituents who are relying on us to actually work to solve problems. We've done nothing to support USMCA, to bring it up for a vote. We've done nothing to bring down the cost of prescription drugs. We haven't done anything since we've been here. And the reason is because we've been focused on fighting each other online, biting back and forth, rushing in front of the cameras, boosting our Twitter followers, and inciting the very division that prevents us from seeking common ground. Like I know most of my colleagues, came here to find common ground. We came here to fight for the ideals that make our nation great. I am the son of Cuban immigrants, proudly. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman reserves. The chair recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. Nedler.
Thank you. I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentlelady from Michigan, Ms. Tlaib.
The gentlelady from Michigan is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in support of this resolution because I want every single person in my district to know that not only are they part of the squad, but we are all here to stay. I want them to know that they belong, that we see and hear them loud and clear. I am more proud today, Mr. Speaker, than ever to be the daughter of Palestinian immigrants, to be the first in my family to graduate high school and later college, to have grown up in the city that birthed movements that fought and won against racism and inequality in our country. It is a city that taught me to never back down, to speak up when I see injustice, and one that elected the first of 2 Muslim women serving in the United States Congress. This resolution chooses all of us. It chooses you. It chooses those who are marginalized, and more importantly, it chooses the values that we all must live up to. We cannot allow anyone, especially the President of the United States, to erode our core American values. I urge my colleagues to please choose our country, choose the American people, and to support this resolution. Thank you.
The gentlelady's time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Collins.
Thank you. At this time, I yield 1.5 minutes to the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Tyler.
Thank you, Mr. Collins. Mr. Speaker, I rise today in opposition to House Resolution 489, the latest legislative attack on the president. Much like most of the ideas and comments coming from the leading members of the socialist left, yesterday's press conference was at best political theater. In the last few days, Democrat members of this House have attacked the president with claims of racism. Some have even said, and then walked back, similar comments referring to the Democrat House Speaker. None of those accusations are based in fact. As the representative of the people of the 9th Congressional District of Pennsylvania, I feel it is most important to address this matter and then move on to engage in the work and what matters of real substance and importance to the people of our country, rather than baseless name-calling and offensive lectures. The ongoing policy debate across the country will continue to be socialism versus American exceptionalism. The people will decide our direction. What has really happened here is that the president and his supporters have been forced to endure months of allegations of racism and concentration camp accusations. I yield back.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from,
30 more seconds. I'll give the gentleman 30 more seconds.
the gentleman has an additional 30 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Collins. This slander, this ridiculous slander, does a disservice to our nation and the American people, and I, like many, am tired of it. I urge a no vote on the resolution aimed purely at harassing the President of the United States, and I yield back.
Reserve.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from New York, Mr. Nadler, is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentlelady from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee.
The gentlelady from Texas, Ms. Lee, is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the gentleman. I said earlier today that I wish we were not here, but we are here. And now I wish to indicate that I am appalled at any commentary that demeans or hurts a fellow human being or a fellow American or a fellow world citizen. And so the recounting of various statements, I realize and recognize that comments were made about statements to ease the pain of those who are receiving it. Right now, we're talking about comments that came from the highest office in the land, which really does reflect what this little book, the Constitution, says, that this nation was organized to create a more perfect union. But yet, unfortunately, the officer in the White House, the President of the United States, took to tweeting and talked about the first African-American woman from the 7th District, talked about the first Palestinian-American woman, the youngest woman elected to Congress, and the first Somali-American woman of color. And so it is imperative that today, along with HRS 494, my resolution, that we condemn this action and we do it together. I ask my Republican colleagues to vote for the underlying resolution. I yield back.
The gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At this time, I yield 3 minutes to the gentlewoman from West Virginia, Ms. Miller.
The gentleman from West Virginia is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to speak in opposition to the resolution on the floor. For the past 7 months, the President has stated that there is a crisis on our border. Republican House leadership has said there is a crisis on the border. My colleagues have said there is a crisis on the border. And I have said there is a crisis on the border. Throughout this, the Washington Democrats have denied it again and again. From the party leadership and the committee chairs, in hearings, and even on the House floor, many have said that the crisis is fake, phony, non-existent, manufactured, imaginary, and false. They turned a blind eye to a crisis because of a political opposition, and the media followed suit. A few weeks ago, several of my colleagues across the aisle took a trip to our southern border, bringing cameras and journalists along with them. They finally came to terms with what the Republicans had been saying for months. However, instead of focusing on the root of the problem, underfunding and overcrowding, backlog cases, and unprecedented surges, they opposed funding and passed a bill to ban construction on the southern border. For 7 months, my colleagues across the aisle have denied a crisis and failed to act. They still haven't acted. I want to work together to solve this crisis. Instead, we are here debating political nonsense. I've had enough talk about tweets, squads, infighting, labels, and petty disagreements. When we look at the content of the legislation brought up for discussion today, it is no surprise that the American people have such a low approval of Congress. It is not a messaging bill to placate the activists. It's an advancement of the socialist agenda, a bill to handcuff our president or a denouncement of the American values. I came to Congress to create jobs, grow the economy, innovate our energy industry, and fix West Virginia's infrastructure. I was sent here to move our country forward and to solve the problems that actually affect the lives of those we represent, to improve our communities, our country. That is why we're all here. This resolution is a waste of time. I urge my colleagues to oppose this legislation and any legislation that doesn't deliver the results for our country that our citizens deserve. I yield back the remainder of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from New York is now recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Cohen.
The gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Cohen, is recognized. 1 minute.
Thank you. I join in supporting this resolution. I felt that we should have had a stronger resolution that censored the president, HRES 490, because the conduct of which has been charged is beneath the office of the president. He should not disparage people and suggest they go back to where they were born. Ms. Ocasio-Cortez was born in the Bronx, and her parents were born in Puerto Rico. Mr. Trump should know Puerto Rico is the United States of America. From references to Haiti and African countries as whole countries, to their fine people on both sides in Charlottesville with neo-Nazis and Klansmen there, he's gone out of his way to find opportunities to besmirch Hispanic Americans, people of Mexican descent, and African Americans and African countries. This is wrong and beneath the office of the president. I yield back the balance of my time.
Let me remind members again to refrain from engaging in personality-based remarks toward the president or any other member. The gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I ask for a time check on both sides, please.
The gentleman from Georgia has 12 and a half minutes, quarters.
Gentleman from New York.
The gentleman from New York has 20 minutes.
Thank you. This time I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Duffy.
The gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized.
Appreciate the gentleman for yielding, and thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to note at the start of this resolution, for the first 3 pages, I agree with everything. We have great quotes in here of our founders and American presidents who talk about the strength of this country that has come from immigrants and immigration, and I wholeheartedly concur. As we get to page 4, though, I have significant disagreement. I would note that on page 4, on the whereas, it's noted that Trump's racist comments have legitimized fear and hatred of new Americans. And I just want to make a point to my friends across the aisle, because in paragraph 2, you note that it's committed to keeping America open to those who lawfully seek refuge and asylum from violence and oppression. Lawfully seek refuge and asylum. But I would note that just recently, President Trump has said those who have sought asylum, had a hearing, and have a deportation order, you are all offended by that. You didn't include in your resolution those who had deportation orders issued, your opposition to them being removed. So you actually agree with us and President Trump that those who have lawful orders of deportation should be sent out of the country, just to cite your resolution. But I want to note, Mr. Speaker, that I've looked closely at the chain of 3 tweets sent out by President Trump. And in those tweets, I see nothing that references anybody's race. Not a thing. I don't see anyone's name being referenced in the tweets. But the president's referring to people, congresswomen, who are anti-American. And lo and behold, everybody in this chamber knows who he's talking about. Who are the anti-American members of Congress? He didn't say their names. He did not say their race, but he commented on what they view, how they view America. And we all know who he's talking about. I want immigrants to come to this country. But if you come to this country, shouldn't you love this country? We all come here and see imperfection. And we work every week trying to make our country better. But to say I wholeheartedly dislike the country, the fact that I'm going to call the president an MFer, good Lord, what has the institution become? And then to come to this floor and chastise the president for a couple of tweets when that's the language you use against him, that is rich, Mr. Speaker, that's the language that the left would use, and then try to call out the president who didn't cite a race or he didn't cite a name. I look at this and I think we are all called to do better and be better. We should make this country better. But when I look at some who say, I believe that socialism is a purer form of government and a better economic economy over capitalism that has given us the freest, most generous, most prosperous country that's ever existed on the face of the earth, that we want to trade this in for a system that has always failed, I think you're going to see Republicans push back against that, and I think many Democrats will push back against that. And I think that's what this argument really comes down to. And one other note. I look at some of my conservative colleagues, whether it's Candace Owen, Diamond and Silk, Justice Thomas, who are...
The gentleman, please.
I yield back.
The gentleman from New York is recognized, Mr. Nadler. Before you go, let me again say, please direct your comments to the chair.
Mr. Speaker, I have a parliamentary inquiry.
Woman will state a parliamentary inquiry.
My inquiry is this. My colleague across the aisle just referred to members of Congress as anti-American. I believe that those words are defamatory, and I would like to ask whether that is appropriate for a request for the gentleman to take down his words.
The chair will not issue an advisory opinion. I have directed both sides to please address the chair, number one. And number two, I've asked that members refrain from engaging in any personality-based remarks. So the chair is not going to issue an advisory at this point.
So a member can say that other members of Congress are anti-American, and there is no resolution for that? We would like to ask the gentleman to take down his words.
Is the gentleman making a demand that the words be taken down?
Yes, I am asking that the gentleman's words be taken down.
Mr. Speaker, I don't believe the request is timely.
In order for the words to be taken down, the objection has to be contemporary to the remarks.
I was trying to get the attention. Okay, Mr. Speaker, I will relinquish the point, but I just want to remind my colleagues that that is completely inappropriate to tell any of us that we are anti-American.
Let me just say, if the violation occurs again, I will interrupt in sentence. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished Speaker of the House.
The distinguished Speaker of the House is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I thank the gentleman for yielding. I thank him for his leadership in so many ways in this Congress, Mr. Nadler. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I commend Mr. Malinowski and Mr. Raskin for bringing this important resolution to the floor. And Mr. Speaker, I come to this floor prayerfully. It's really very, very sad. It was interesting to me, and I spoke out about this, that on Sunday in Catholic masses, and I don't know beyond that, the gospel of the day was the gospel of the Good Samaritan. A person asked Jesus, "What do I have to do to enter the kingdom of heaven?" And Christ replied, "Love thy neighbor as thyself. Show mercy." That very same day, and then went on to talk, and then he said, "Well, how do I do this?" And Jesus gave him the example of the Good Samaritan. Everyone is familiar with how a stranger helped another stranger. A foreigner helped another foreigner, the Good Samaritan. Love thy neighbor as thyself, show mercy. On that very same day, coincidentally, ironically, sadly, whatever adverb you want to use, the president was instituting raids into the homes of families. I went to Spanish Mass this weekend to see, and saw the dignity of those families, the beauty of the children, and the fear that the president had struck in their hearts as we were listening to the gospel of the Good Samaritan, to show mercy and love thy neighbor as thyself. That very same day, unfortunately, there were those who were not informed by that gospel. And so here we are later in that day. It was stunning to hear the words that were used. Go home, to some of our colleagues. The same words that were used to so many people in our country, whether because they weren't born here or because they didn't look like some others here. Go home. As annoyed and as insulted as we all should be about the president saying that about our colleagues, it's also not showing mercy for him to say that about so many people in our country as he wants to split up families. So I thank Mr. Malinowski and Mr. Raskin for the opportunity to speak to the statements that the president made later in the day of the gospel of the Good Samaritan. Mr. Malinowski was born abroad, Mr. Raskin for his firm leadership in advancing this important resolution. The House, hopefully, has come together, standing as one, to denounce the White House's xenophobic attacks on our members, on our people, and to defend the values of America. And what is America? America is many things: a land of a great constitution, which is under threat, a beautiful land that God has given us, which is being degraded, values that we share that are being undermined. But America is also a nation largely, but not totally, largely of immigrants. As this resolution so beautifully states, the founders conceived America as a haven for refuge, for people fleeing from religious and political persecution. And Thomas Jefferson, Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, having opposite views on other subjects, all emphasized that the nation gained as it attracted new people in search of freedom and livelihood for their families. The resolution quotes our most iconic presidents, who all recognize that immigrants are the constant reinvigoration of America, of hope, determination, optimism, and courage to make the future better. Those are American values. Those are American traits: hope, optimism, courage. And many of these immigrants, when they come here with those values and those traits, make America more American. Franklin Roosevelt said, "Remember always that all of us, and you and I especially, are descendants from immigrants." President John F. Kennedy, who wrote that the contribution of immigrants can be seen in every aspect of our national life. And President Ronald Reagan, who he said it so beautifully in his last speech as President of the United States, which is quoted in this resolution, who said, "If we ever close the door to new Americans, our leadership in the world would soon be lost." Yet the president's comments about our colleagues this weekend showed that he does not share those American values. These comments from the White House are disgraceful and disgusting, and these comments are racist. How shameful to hear him continue to defend those offensive words, words that we have all heard him repeat, not only about our members, but about countless others. Our caucus will continue to forcefully respond to those attacks on our members, which reflect a fundamental disrespect for the beautiful diversity of America. There is no place anywhere for the president's words, which are not only divisive, but dangerous, and have legitimized and increased fear and hatred of new Americans and people of color. It's so sad, because you would think that there would be a given that we would universally in this body just say, of course, of course. And there's no excuse for any response to those words but a swift and strong, unified condemnation. Every single member of this institution, Democratic and Republican, should join us in condemning the president's racist tweets. To do anything less would be a shocking rejection of our values and a shameful abdication of our oath of office to protect the American people. I urge a unanimous vote and yield back the balance of my.
I was just going to give the General Speaker of the House, if she would like to rephrase that comment.
I have cleared my remarks as a parliamentarian before I read them.
And take it, and I ask the words be taken down. I make a point of order, the gentlewoman's words are unparliamentary and ready to be taken down.
The chair will remind all members, please do not make comments toward personality-based comments. The gentleman from Georgia is
I
recognized.
made a point of order that the gentlewoman's unparliamentary and request they be taken down.
Is the gentleman making a demand that the words be taken down?
I request that the gentlewoman's words are unparliamentary and request that they be taken down.
All members will suspend. The clerk will now report the words.
speed with what's going on right now on the floor of the House. You may have heard earlier where Speaker Pelosi's words were ruled out of order by Majority Leader Steny Hoyer, who was in the chair at the time. Then there was a vote on whether or not her words should be taken down. That failed on a party line vote. Now, because if words are or remarks are ruled out of order, that person normally loses the right to speak on the floor of the House. Here is a vote to restore the Speaker's right to come to the floor and speak for the rest of the day. Here's how Roll Call magazine recorded what happened today. They say amid debate over whether to condemn tweets by President Donald Trump as racist on Tuesday, the House descended into parliamentary chaos, with Representative Emanuel Cleaver II, who was presiding, abruptly dropping the gavel and saying, "I abandon the chair." Roll Call goes on to say it was an extraordinary moment on an extraordinary day as the House considered a resolution condemning Trump's tweets from the weekend that told 4 freshman Democrats from the House to go back and help fix the totally broken and crime-infested places from which they came. Before Cleaver's action, the story goes on to say the House debate had come to an abrupt halt when Georgia Republican Doug Collins, who you just saw on the floor, took a rare procedural step to take down comments by Speaker Nancy Pelosi. So let's show you some of the action on the floor with Mr. Cleaver, who was in the chair.
The chair is ready to make a statement. I came in here to try to do this in a fair way. I kept warning both sides, let's not do this, hoping we could get through. Mr. Japal had a situation where we could be in here on another motion to take down words of a friend of mine. But we don't ever want to pass up, it seems, an opportunity to escalate. And that's what this is. I'll dare anybody to look at any of the footage and see if there was any unfairness. But unfairness is not enough because we want to just fight. I abandon the chair.
So again, this is a vote that would allow Speaker Pelosi to come back to the floor and speak again. Tonight, a simple majority would be sufficient.
Members voted. Does any member wish to change the vote? Mr. Stanton. Mr. Stanton votes no.
On this vote, the ayes are 231, the noes are 190. The motion is adopted. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. The gentlewoman will be allowed to proceed in order. The chair announces the remaining time in the debate. The gentleman from Georgia has 9 1/4 minutes. The gentlewoman from Texas has 19 minutes. The gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At this time, I yield 1 minute to the minority leader, the gentleman from California, Mr. McCarthy.
It's for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, on page 1 of the original Thomas Jefferson Manual of Parliamentary Practice, he writes that it is the very material that order, decency, and regularity be preserved in a dignified public body. Now, we all have the awesome privilege of serving in that dignified public body. This, the People's House. Our American democracy and its institutions, they're looked up to as an example for the entire world. And Jefferson's emphasis on order and decency is just as important today as it was more than 200 years ago. Unfortunately, that was not the case today. Madam Speaker, today is a day that historians will write about. It is a sad day for this House, the People's House. Our rules of order and decency were broken today. And worse, the House just voted to condone this violation of decorum. Madam Speaker, I know there's frustration in this body, but it is our duty to focus not on retribution, but on building a more perfect union. We can be doing so much more, and we should be doing so much better. Madam Speaker, I would ask that all members take it upon themselves to uphold the dignity of this institution. Let us preserve and promote those ideals of order and decency that this body was founded upon, and that this body will need if we are to address the many challenges facing our nation. Madam Speaker, it's not just our nation who is watching, the world is watching us. I hope we can rise to the occasion. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentlelady from Texas.
My pleasure, Madam Speaker, to yield 1 minute to the distinguished member of the Judiciary Committee, the gentlelady from California, Ms. Bass. 1 minute.
Gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, the world is watching and the world is in shock. Today, I rise to speak in support of this resolution condemning the hateful rhetoric of Donald Trump. His comments were beneath the dignity of the office of the President of the United States, and they have no place in our country. My 4 colleagues he attacked have every right to be in the United States. They are just as American as any one of us. And it's shameful that the leader of our country would seek to disparage them for political gain. But the sad truth is that if we were to pass a resolution every time Donald Trump said something offensive, little else would happen in Congress. For that reason, this moment has to be about much more than condemning Donald Trump. This moment has to be about moving our country back toward its best values and ensuring that every American, regardless of origin, race, or sex, has an opportunity to succeed. The American people want to see us fighting for jobs, healthcare, free elections, and policies that recognize the humanity of all who seek refuge in our nation. As chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, I remember when the president said to Black America, "What do you have to lose?" When the leader of this nation attacks 2 of our members, 2 of the 4 women are members of the Congressional Black Caucus, what we have lost is a president that has dignity. Can I have a couple of more seconds?
Time's expired.
I'm happy to yield the gentlelady 15 seconds.
Someone that has the capacity to bring our country together is what we have lost. But even for this president, this is a new low. Using rhetoric against someone of a different race based on the belief that one's race is superior. Since the president will not lead, we must. I yield back the balance of my time.
Reserve.
Gentleman reserves. The chair will, in case anybody forgot, remind everyone in this House on both sides of the aisle that the rules will be strictly enforced for the remainder of this debate. And members are advised to think closely about their words, particularly when referring to personalities. Gentlelady from Texas.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm pleased to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from New York, the distinguished Democratic chair of the Democratic Caucus of the House, Mr.
Gentleman is
Jeffries.
recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, our diversity is a strength. It is not a weakness. We are a nation of immigrants, some voluntary, others involuntary. But as Dr. King once observed, we may have come over on different ships, but we're all in the same boat now. We are a gorgeous mosaic of people from throughout the world. We are white, we are black, we are Latino, we are Asian, we are Native American. We are Christian, we are Jewish, we are Muslim, we are Hindu, we are believers, we are non-believers. We are gay, we are straight, we are young, we are older, we are women, we are men, we are citizens, we are dreamers. Out of many, we are one. That's what makes America a great country. And no matter what xenophobic behavior is coming out of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, we will never let anyone take that away from us. Not now, not ever. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Georgia.
Reserve.
Reserves. Gentlelady from Texas.
My pleasure again, Madam Speaker, to yield to the distinguished gentleman from California, Mr. Swalwell, for 1 minute.
Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We have an opportunity today to condemn or condone. Birtherism is racist. Saying a Mexican judge can't be fair because of his heritage is racist. Saying immigrants from Mexico are rapists is racist. Saying there were good people on both sides in Charlottesville is racist. Calling African countries shithole countries is racist. And telling 4 members of this body to go home is racist.
Gentleman will state his
Do you think it's not racist? to say
Gentleman will
those
state
things?
his point of order.
Do you think it's not
So
racist?
the gentleman will suspend. Gentleman will state
Is
his
that
point
what
of
you're saying right now, Mr. Collins?
Gentleman will suspend.
Mr. Collins, is
Gentleman
it not
from-
racist to say these things? Because you can say that right now.
The gentleman from California is out of order. The gentleman from gentleman from California shall suspend. For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia
I
rise?
make a point of order. The gentleman's words are unparliamentary, and I request they be taken down. Order.
Clerk will report the words.
Yeah. Profanity.
Charges of works. But he didn't mention.
purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
I will withdraw an offensive word.
And I'll withdraw my point of order.
Objection.
And may I have an additional 30 seconds?
Gentleman has 30 seconds remaining.
Madam Speaker.
The chair controls, the chair controls the time. The gentleman has 30 seconds remaining. Does the gentlelady wish to grant him an additional 30 seconds?
I am prepared to grant him additional 30
The
seconds.
gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I now withdraw my point of order.
Gentleman withdraws. Gentleman may proceed. 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, we have an opportunity today to condemn or condone. Birtherism is racist. Saying a Mexican judge cannot be fair because of his heritage is racist. Saying immigrants from Mexico are rapists is racist. Telling 4 members of this body to go home because of where you believe they are from is racist. There is racism coming out of the White House. There is racism coming out of the White House. So where will you stand today? That is the question we face. Where will we stand? Will we stop and extinguish the flames of racism from the White House, or will we continue to fan them? History and our children are watching, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia rise?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. At this time, I yield as much time as you may consume to the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Scalise.
Gentleman's recognized for as much time as he may consume.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Madam Speaker. The last vote that we just saw on the House floor is beneath the dignity of the House. We have rules for a reason. Just because one party is in the majority, Madam Speaker, doesn't mean that the rules don't apply to them. The rules apply to all of us. Just as we're passing laws here that ought to apply to all people fairly across this country. The reason we have these rules is so that we can rise above the fray. We have disagreements on this floor. What's great about this country is we have the ability to come and battle over the disagreements. But we shouldn't get into personality conflicts on this floor. We shouldn't be trying to accuse people of one thing or another disparagingly on this floor. That's why we have these rules, so that we can actually debate the issues that people care about. Rather than engaging in this constant barrage of personality attack that we've seen week after week after week. The American people expect us to be spending our time up here fighting for the issues they care about. They want us to be spending time focusing on lowering their prescription drug prices, lowering healthcare prices, rather than this foolishness. They want us to be solving the crisis at the border, not ignoring it, not disparaging it, but actually focusing on solving it. And these are easy issues for us to solve if we come together and spend real time in good faith working on them, rather than this foolishness. Look at all of the other problems that our country faces, that people call on us to address. They expect that we're spending our time up here focusing on those problems, getting our economy back on track like it is now. It took people working together, and it's working. We can do more. Fighting the evils across this world. When you look at what Russia's doing, when you look at what Iran's doing, when you look at what China is doing, us to be coming together, standing up and working on those problems for the people who sent us here. Not worried about ourselves, not fighting amongst ourselves, but actually focusing on their problems. That's why we're supposed to be up here. That's why the rules of the House should apply to all people, not just selectively to some. And with that, I yield back the balance of my
Gentleman
time.
yields back. Gentlelady from Texas.
My pleasure to yield to the distinguished gentleman from California, Representative Liu, for 1 minute.
Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I am an immigrant. I'm a person of faith, and I served on active duty in the United States military because I love America. Yet throughout my life, I've had people tell me to go back to China or Japan or North Korea. And like many immigrants, when I get that go back insult, it is hurtful. It makes me feel like I don't belong here in this country. And make no mistake, when people tell me to go back to where I came from, that is a racist insult because it's based on race. If I was white, they would not tell me to go back to China. I experienced that insult because my race happens to be Asian. But the good news is that Americans at record high levels support immigrants. We are not going anywhere. America is our home, and I will still be standing here long after the occupant of the White House leaves. Yield back.
The chair will remind all persons in the gallery that you're here as guests of the House, and any manifestation of approval or disapproval of proceedings is in violation of the rules of the House. Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentlelady from Texas.
My pleasure to yield to the distinguished gentlelady from Washington State, Representative John Paul, for 2 minutes.
Gentlelady is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I am appalled at the statements coming from the White House telling people who dissent that somehow you should go back to your country if you criticize the United States. Well, let me remind you that dissent is patriotic and, in fact, a core value to our democracy enshrined in our Constitution. And yes, I am a proud naturalized citizen born in India, a proud patriot, a proud person who belongs in this country. And it's not the first time I've heard go back to your own country, but it is the first time I have heard it coming from the White House. And frankly, Madam Speaker, I am appalled that on this floor, my Republican colleagues would call any of us anti-American. That is why this vote is so important, because we have to let the rest of the country know that the House of Representatives will stand up for the Constitution, represent and defend every single person in the country, regardless of the color of their skin or the country of their birth. Madam Speaker, my Republican colleagues have been talking about patriotism, about love of country. One of them said, love it or leave it. But what is love if not to make what we love better through our critique, our work, and our service? That is what real Americans do. We do not stifle dissent, we do not otherize or sow hatred, and we certainly never say, go back to your country, to a brown or a black person, because that is a racist trope. I hope that every single member of this chamber, Republican and Democrat, will join me in rejecting the president's message and vote in support of this resolution. That is the American thing to do. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back.
I reserve.
Gentleman from Georgia reserves. Gentlelady from Texas.
Please, Madam Speaker, to yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentlelady from Pennsylvania, Representative Dean.
Gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you very much. Madam Speaker, words matter. Decency matters. Recently, President Trump told 4 congresswomen of color to, quote, go back to their home countries. Mr. President, they are home. 3 of these congresswomen, my colleagues, were born in the United States. The 4th, also my colleague, is a naturalized U.S. citizen. They are as American as I am, as the president is, as the first lady is, or anyone else, period. Telling people who look different to go back for where they came from is a refrain laced with hate. This rhetoric is neither new nor a surprise, but that doesn't mean we can allow it to stand. And it belies a fundamental misunderstanding of our nation's promise that we are all created equal and that everyone has a role to play in building a more perfect union, not just white Americans, every American. We hereby recognize these words for what they are: offensive, hateful, and the people we represent deserve better. As a co-sponsor, I believe we must call out hate wherever we see it, whether in our own houses or in the White House. I urge all members to support the resolution. Words matter. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Reserve.
Gentleman from Georgia reserves. Gentlelady from Texas.
I'm pleased to yield 1.5 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from Georgia, Representative Lewis.
Gentleman's recognized for 1.5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise with a sense of righteous indignation to support this resolution. I know racism when I see it. I know racism when I feel it. and at the highest level of government, there's no room for racism. It sows the seeds of violence and destroys the hopes and dreams of people. The world is watching. They are shocked and dismayed because it seems we have lost our way as a nation, as a proud and great people. We are one Congress, and we are here to serve one house, the American house, the American people. Some of us have been victims of the stain, the pain, and the hurt of racism. In the 50s and during the 60s, segregationists told us to go back when we protested for our rights. They told ministers, priests, rabbis, and nuns to go back. They told the innocent little children seeking just and equal education to go back. As a nation and as a people, we need to go forward and not backward. With this vote, we stand with our sisters. Three were born in America, and one came here looking for a better life. With this vote, we meet our moral obligation to condemn hate, racism, and bigotry in every form. Thank you.
Gentlemen need more time? Gentlemen yields.
Let's do what is right, what is fair, and what is just.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Reserve.
Lady from Texas.
I'm pleased to yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentleman from Ohio, Representative Ryan.
Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
We, the people, a more perfect union, the common defense, general welfare, common good. These United States, the words and phrases of our founding documents were about unity. Were about us coming together against the political and economic concentration of power. Division is the enemy in the United States today. We are unraveling before the very eyes of the American people. And I believe that this president, that the White House, does not want to talk about the issues facing the American people today. 75% of the American people live in paycheck to paycheck. Seniors paying $1,000 a month in prescription drugs. Students drowning in student loans. Yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would like to
inquire.
I'm done as far as and ready to close if you are.
We're prepared to close.
Thank
The
you.
gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I will not belabor this. I have made many of the points that I have said before. I think this was rushed to the floor. I think this is what happens, unfortunately, when things are rushed. There are things that need to be done, and this decorum of this House is important. We've had a long lesson of that today. The very essence of the resolution, which has issues beyond, needs to be considered. And when we do this, then I think, as I said in my opening, and I'll stick by what I said then, that this needs to be voted down. This does not need to go forward, and we need to get to a certain time when we are back to literally doing the people's business. This is the third time, Madam Speaker, that I've been on the floor doing this. Third time. More time than I've done on immigration, more time than I've done on any other bills, more bills that could actually get signed into law. As my whip just said just a few moments ago, there are things we could actually sit down and find common ground on. But it seems like common ground is gone. There are some of us willing to reach our hands across the aisle and say, let's find common ground because people are hurting. Why don't we solve those? Instead, we continue to seemingly want to go to the press release or to the political statement, which is frustrating. I understand. But we've got to get better. We've got to look at this and say, what happens to the American people? What happened to the people who sent us here, who are looking at this and saying, what do we need to do to make our lives better, not the lives in this body? When we understand that, that is when we come together. That's when we take the decorum of this House. That's when we find ways to actually speak as friends to each other who have been elected to serve a common purpose. That is our higher aim. And when we degrade that, we are not being honest with ourselves. So let's get to the people's business. There's budget issues looming. There's caps looming. There's debt ceiling looming. And there's still problems at our border that is a crisis. And these need to be fixed. Let's take up those bills. Let's have honest debate. I'll put a bill up, you put a bill up. Let's do what we're supposed to do here. Have markups. Let's run through things through committee. Let's take seriously what we said to do. We've both at times as parties have been guilty of not doing that. Let's focus now, at least where we are now, and say this is not the way forward. This is not where we need to be because of the many problems inherent in the resolution itself, but also the way it was brought to us. And we've seen that play out on the floor today. Is that really how we're going to leave it with the American people? That rules can be broken and then nothing done about it? Is that really where we're going to be, that we're not going to bring issues to the floor that can be discussed, that have been brought through committee, that actually affects people's lives? That's the frustration I have, Madam Speaker. But time for debate on this needs to be done. We need to vote no. We need to move forward. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentlelady from Texas.
Madam Speaker, the way to move forward is by voting yes on the underlying resolution. To paraphrase the Declaration of Independence, it is indicated that we all are created equal with certain unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That is immigrant and non-immigrant. That is an individual whose religion you believe in and one you do not. That is a lifestyle that you may not know and understand. It may be a race or ethnicity that you have never come to be able to accept. But in this nation, the 13 founding colonies, fleeing persecution, were described as creating an experiment. It was not a perfect experiment. It was some of us who came to this nation in the bottom of the belly of a slave boat. There were some that were indigent servants. And many came by boat. Some walked across a border that has created havoc. But they were people desperate for freedom and the right to make their lives better. We can account for those people by the history books and the decades of heroes and sheroes who have come in a different skin, a different religion, a different basis. They've even put on the uniform of this nation because they love this country. I'm reminded of the era of Dr. Martin Luther King, the many miles he walked with the soldiers, the civil rights soldiers, and his early book that said, Why We Can't Wait. And so I join with the idea that we must work for the American people. We must provide for the increase in the minimum wage and good health care and education. But at the same time, there is something in this nation that our children demand that we do. And that is, what are the values of the red, white, and blue? What are the values of those stars that represent the many states of this nation? The values are that we are a nation based upon laws, morality, and values, and a love of country, due process, equality, and justice. And it means that every single person must have their fundamental right of respect. This resolution is simply that. It is a fundamental right to respect and dignity. In this instance, for 4 members of the United States Congress from Boston, from New York, from Minnesota, and as they go on to their places, it is very clear that they must have the respect that is respecting of this particular Congress. And so this resolution, these 4 women are no less deserving of dignity than anyone else. And this resolution is simply one that is to seek not condoning, as was said, but a condemnation of attitudes that may parlay racist beliefs. No one stands for that. And we cannot go on to all that is good without saying to the nation and the world that this is not good, It is not America. We will not accept that as our definition because we do believe in the creation of a more perfect union. And so I conclude by saying we condemn the hurtful and offensive comments that demean immigrants and people of color, especially if those comments originate from the White House. And what we will do today is to accept the challenge of Dr. Martin Luther King, a peacemaker, man of hope, and we will say why we can't wait, because the nation calls upon our higher angels, and that is what we will do when we affirm this resolution on behalf of the people of the United States of America. With that, I ask my colleagues to vote for this very important resolution, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Pursuant to House Resolution 491, the previous question is ordered on the resolution and the preamble. The question is on adoption of the resolution. All in favor say aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. The resolution is agreed to. For what purpose does the gentleman, for what purpose does the gentlelady from
I ask for a recorded vote.
Recorded vote is requested. Those favoring a recorded vote will rise. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 15-minute vote.
So after a long day of back and forth on the House floor, now the final vote on Resolution HRes 489, which is titled Condemning President Trump's Racist Comments Directed at Members of Congress.